Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, Oz Alashe is the former soldier turned cybercrime fighter. He's gone from the front line of some of the world's most dangerous conflicts to the front line of phishing, fraud and fake identities. He runs one of London's hottest tech firms, CybSafe, and he's here to tell us how to keep ourselves safe online from the bad guys. Oz, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you on the show, not least because cybersecurity seems to have emerged as the issue of our time. Frame it for us. How safe are we?
How safe are we? It's a really good question. I guess the reality is we're as safe as we want to be. We're certainly as safe as the effort we put into it. Cybersecurity is so important right now because technology is so important to us, and we are using it to solve some pretty big challenges.
Could we establish a working definition of what cybersecurity actually is?
I think we could, actually. In fact, I think lots of people have tried to do so and define it slightly differently, but the reality is most people solidify around the fact that it's security as it relates to networks, data and systems.
Right.
And so actually,
it's more than my password.
It's more than your password.
Right.
It's about information in general.
Okay. Now, obviously, last year, the big headline grabbers were Parliament and the NHS being hacked. Does that mean that they've just got bad systems, or are we all no longer safe?
The reality is we're all probably more vulnerable than we realise quite often is the case, and in those particular cases, absolutely, those were large government entities or organisations that were hacked. In some cases, in the case of the NHS, it was a pretty spurious attempt. It wasn't exactly targeted at the NHS, but massive effect. And of course, in the case of Parliament, actually, there was quite a lot to suggest that Parliament was targeted. We could all fall victim to that. Many organisations do. We hear about all the large ones. We don't necessarily hear about
when you say fall victim, as in like breaches, or is it more the fact of us being lured into things? I mean, how does the actual crime part of cybercrime actually work?
Well, it's interesting that, and you're absolutely right to hone in on the fact that quite often it is crime, it is cybercrime, and there are people who are actively trying to get access to networks and systems, and they do so generally through people, which of course is one of the things that we really focus on. The fact of the matter is that most of us and most of our systems rely on people getting access to that in order to steal information and data. So they might be trying to hack your password or get access to your password, get access to your email accounts, get access to your financial data. There really is a variety of things.
So if you were to frame the growth of the issue of cybercrime, if we get on to what you can do to secure yourself, in terms of how quickly is this growing as a problem around the world? Give us a sense of the scale.
Well, it's really quite challenging. There's no shortage of stats. The fact is that cybercrime is probably, and anyone who suggested that crime doesn't pay clearly hasn't looked at the average cybercriminal. There is a lot of cybercrime, and it's an exponential increase, both in terms of the cost to organisations, but in terms of the amount of money that cybercriminals are harvesting, are making. And of course, this is a global problem. You're absolutely right. We face it as a huge challenge here at the capital in the UK, but actually it's a problem across the country and across the globe.
And where are the hotspots? I mean, where are the criminals? I mean, are they everywhere, or are they of certain countries? Or?
Yeah, well, the reality is they are probably everywhere, but there are certain areas where there are probably more than others, and those areas are areas where they are able to operate with relative impunity. I say relative because every government is trying to tackle this. The reality is not all governments are as well equipped as others. Here in the UK, we're quite fortunate. Our government has determined to make the UK the safest place to do business online and to live. It's quite a big...
If it can stop itself being hacked.
If it can stop itself being hacked, well, you might as well start with yourself. And actually, we're investing quite heavily in the UK as a nation into this space. £1.9 billion spent over the last, or to be spent over a 5-year period, which is going to be.
And what is that money spent on? I mean, how do we make ourselves safe? I mean, what are the core investments?
Well, that's a variety of things. Actually, some of that has been spent on actually how the government communicates with industry and with academia and collaborates to tackle some of these challenges. Some of it was spent on the creation of the National Cybersecurity Centre, which was really the front of house for government initiatives and efforts in this space, the National Technical Authority, as you were. And some of it is spent on education, for example, increasing the number of young people coming into the space because we need more professionals, and also educating the general population about the challenges.
I read here that you say you'd be amazed at how many people pick up a USB stick with the word bonuses written on it and plug it straight in. I mean, are we just easily duped online?
People are often easily duped. It's not because people are stupid. It's not because we don't care. Actually, quite often it's because it's not necessarily the highest priority, or we're not necessarily thinking that somebody will do that. Sometimes we are too trusting, and the reality is that we need to adjust that. We cannot trust everything that we put online to remain safe and secure online.
Do you think, I mean, is cybercrime going to be something that in some way we all experience as people? I mean, is it just going to become part of the cost of living in an online world, or can we actually secure ourselves and actually crack it?
I think that it's definitely part of the cost of living in an online world, and increasingly in an online world as well. That's the point. The accelerating pace of change as far as technology is concerned means that we are going to be even more connected, even more digitized, even more dependent on technology, and therefore, arguably, to a degree, even more vulnerable. But there is a lot we can do, and once we start to understand that, actually, and take responsibility for it at an individual and organisational level.
Right. I mean, you took responsibility for this. You formed a business, CybSafe. I mean, tell us a little bit about what the business actually does.
Yes, well, you know, an amazing organisation full of amazing people, actually.
Okay, that's the ad.
That's the ad, absolutely.
It does a day
but
job,
actually, full of amazing people who are really determined to help individuals and organisations.
Because you're dealing with the human side.
The human side.
So what does that mean? That means what?
Well,
training.
Actually, if you look at the percentage of breaches that take place, majority of those occur because people don't do the right thing or actually don't do something that they should have done.
Right.
And
give us an example of the wrong thing.
The wrong thing, picking up a USB stick that you don't know where it's come from and plugging it into a system without checking to make sure it doesn't carry any viruses. Putting too much information online about yourself, making it easy for somebody who might want to steal information from you to find out about you.
For example, Facebook?
Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, lots and lots of social media platforms.
So we should actually put less online?
We should be careful about what we put online, and we should also be very aware of the fact that most people will have access to more than we probably realise by reading that information and aggregating data. So is it necessary to let people know where you live? Necessary to let them know the exact date of your birth? Is it necessary to let them know the name of your mother's or your mother's maiden name? These are all security questions.
And when the cyber criminal has put that piece or that puzzle together, what can they do with that information? What happens next?
We see every day that actually cyber criminals are able to use that information either to convince you that they're somebody that they're not, in order to get you to encourage you to maybe to click on a link or share some information that you would otherwise not share if you knew that the person you were sharing it with was pretending to be somebody else. That's one thing they might do. Of course, they might also use that information to convince somebody else that they're you. They might steal your identity in order to do other things. And of course,
I mean, you get the sense that there is a real sense of fear about this issue, I mean, especially in large corporations. I mean, I'm always mindful at these moments of like a Churchill phrase of never let a good crisis go to waste. I mean, is there going to be a whole industry that comes out of this with more CybSafes, more kind of businesses like yours that are in the business of, I guess, really the bad side of the internet, the bad side of digital?
Well, is it the bad side? It's unfortunate that there is so much that's happening that so many people are really suffering from. But actually, I would suggest that this is the good side. Technology is important to us, and this industry that you're describing, which actually is here already and is thriving, especially in the UK and especially in London. Actually, this is about helping people make use of technology.
Right, but okay, you say it's the good side, but I mean, ultimately, I guess you're providing the antidote to other people's misery in the sense of I've been hacked, I've had my identity stolen, whatever it might be. I mean, it's a good thing to that extent, but it has grown out of a problem.
Absolutely. And most technology, most good innovative technology comes out of a problem.
Can you ultimately solve the problem? Is the mission of CybSafe to close the doors one day because it's mission accomplished?
It'll be, I think we're some way from solving that particular problem. The mission of CybSafe is absolutely to change the way people view the human aspect of cybersecurity. And as far as that is concerned, we're making great progress as a nation in that regard. And so we, alongside lots of other great companies, are contributing to that. Will we ever get to the point where there's no requirement for us to maybe educate ourselves, improve the way in which we handle technology or engage with it? I think we're some way from that, but hopefully, yes, absolutely.
So a lot of the sort of people that watch a show like the Capital Conversation will be entrepreneurs, they'll be smaller businesses. What are a couple of things that they could do to make themselves safer against the backdrop of the environment that you've described?
Well, actually, the first thing is to understand where our information actually is. So as an organisation, it's really important that we understand what we hold and what we hold dear, and therefore maybe where it might be vulnerable. That's something that every organisation can do first and foremost. Absolutely ensure that your people who have access to your networks and data and systems, they know what to do with it, how to look after it, not just internally within the organisation, but personally. And also there are other things that we can do. So the National Cybersecurity Centre has an amazing website with lots of great advice. Go to it, have a look at it, follow follow their 10 steps.
You can give us the URL if it's a government site.
I'll probably get it wrong, actually. But
Right.
it's NCSE. If you simply typed in NCSE, they would absolutely find it.
And that's giving you tips about how to keep yourself safe.
Tips on how to stay safe. It's accrediting and pointing out providers for certain services so they know where to go. Businesses quite often don't do the right thing because they're not sure. It's quite a noisy space. Actually, there's a lot of help out there.
A lot of help out there. And if you were to give a top tip, the thing that you've learned along the way, the thing you could do right now, we're going to go into the break in a second. So what's the top tip that you'd give our viewers tonight in terms of making yourself secure online?
I would absolutely consider the human aspect of what they're doing and consider the way in which they engage with technology and actually their people, the members of their teams, and how they engage. They should make sure that those people know exactly how to look after themselves and their organisation's data.
Right, so look after yourself. We're going to be back in a moment because it's time for a short break. But when we return, we move from cyber challenges to the global opportunity for London to take on the lawbreakers who said crime doesn't pay. We'll see you in a minute. You're back. Great to have you with us. Now, my guest today is the cybersecurity expert and former Lieutenant Colonel Oz Alashe. Now, we spoke about really the problems of cybersecurity, but let's talk a little bit about the opportunities. I noticed that the Evening Standard's hack-busting squad includes you as part of London's global fight back. Is cybersecurity going to be one of the sectors that drives London economies forward in a kind of post-Brexit world?
I think it really will be. The UK tech sector is vibrant, it is growing, it is solving some major challenges, and one of those challenges is cybercrime. And so, unsurprisingly, within the UK, but very specifically within London, we are blessed with a huge amount of talent and a huge amount of innovation. And those two things together generally produce some spectacular results.
But does it need to be more of an organised pitch to the world? I mean, do people get it that there are a lot of innovative companies like yours here, or is there more that could be done?
There's always more that could be done, but I think people do get it. We're very fortunate. There are a number of great companies all around the globe, but London is recognised as producing and housing a number of them, many of which are actually moving from overseas to come and set up in London. So whether that's within the tech communities that exist at places like Level 39, or indeed, of course, at Old Street, whether that is actually independent organisations who are just well connected, and of course the government is also putting a lot of effort into this.
I mean, we heard prior to the Brexit vote that things like the digital single market and the opportunities for tech were going to be great if we voted in. Now we've voted out. Has Brexit changed anything for cybersecurity per se, or does life go on?
Well, I think we're still waiting for a number of answers, and the reality is that, like the rest of the nation, regardless of sector, there are still a number of things that remain unresolved, and Brexit, as part of the process, we'll need to resolve them. So, for example, the cybersecurity community, we are really quite keen, like the rest of the tech sector, to understand whether we will still be able to attract the right number of people into the UK to work.
So it's just talent. Is talent the key
Talent
thing?
is a huge key thing.
Right.
It's a huge key thing. Of course, access to finance and funding is also very, very important, but remains strong, and the indicators...
Does the EU fund this sort of work in terms of...
The EU does fund certain programmes, absolutely, and a lot of money and a lot of finance comes from the EU in the form of investment into cybersecurity tech companies. But actually, it's global as well in that sense, and of course, a lot of that money is from here.
I mean, you do get the sense when you speak to a lot of technology leaders that this sense that talent as almost like the new oil, the sort of, we were, the popular mythology is that, of course, AI and robots are going to take away all of the jobs, but every time you meet a technologist, they can't get enough of the right people.
Absolutely.
What's the answer to that?
The magic is created between combining great technology with great human talent. That is how we solve problems. AI, big data, the use of developments in technology to solve some of these issues is extraordinary, and indeed is going to continue to be. But actually, we need great people to do that too.
Do you get the sense that government gets the opportunity for something quite special in this part of the world to be built as a commercial entity in terms of cybersecurity as part of the British pitch?
I think so. I think government does. The question really is whether or not government getting the opportunity, the resources that are applied to it, and then actually the way in which we join that up with organizations who are doing some really quite powerful things, but ultimately need support to reach their full potential, whether those three things join up. And yes, we're seeing examples of that, but there could always be more.
But in terms of that joining up, I mean, we're going to come on to your military career shortly, but presumably things like GCHQ, the security services, the military, I mean, they're all an important part of Britain's kind of cyber fitness, if you will. I mean, do they join up? I mean, should we be reassured at that?
They do both, of course, whilst engaging in what is ultimately their main focus, which is keeping us safe as a nation and indeed ensuring that our interests, both at home and overseas, are protected. But actually, they also join up because they help foster some of the innovation that we've just talked about. So yeah, we're very, very fortunate in that sense as a nation, but there can always be improvements. And actually, we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't see this as a collaboration between government, industry and academia. Actually, that's the collaboration.
I mean, Theresa May spoke some months ago about Russia sort of weaponizing information. I mean, is this where the future not only of crime but also of conflict is going in terms of a digital world?
We're there already.
We're there already.
Right. The truth is that actually information is power. That has always been the case. Digital information is in many ways sometimes easier to access. It's also more prolific in terms of the amount of it that's out there. And so it's not surprising that this would be used against us, either disinformation or indeed, of course, information in that sense. So we've seen lots of global examples of nation-state actors seeking to involve themselves in the businesses of other nations. We should not consider that would not be the target or the aim of a nation towards us here in the UK.
Now, I have to say, reading your CV, I felt like I was reading the audition for the next James Bond. I mean, you know, not only have you got your own business in cybersecurity, you're a former Lieutenant Colonel, not only in the paratroop regiment, but you've also done quite a lot of Special Forces work. Give us a sense of that career. I mean, a very distinguished career by the sounds of it.
I was very, very blessed. I actually commissioned into the parachute regiment, as you said, and then very quickly found myself serving with the UK Special Forces and left there after a number of years. I retired a few years ago and set up CybSafe, a cybersecurity tech business. But the reality is, many of the lessons that I learned there have translated across. Give
us the link. I mean, I noticed that you served in Afghanistan, Northern Ireland, Sierra Leone, to name but three. I mean, in terms of what turns the sort of the frontline soldier into the frontline technologist? Was there a tipping point during your time in the services where you thought, I could do something with this knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved every second of service, and indeed I learnt a lot about myself and indeed actually about serving other people, which is why many people go into the services, even if that's just serving your group of mates that you are spending your time with. But of course, there's a much bigger and broader agenda there, and indeed nationally, that's quite important for us. But actually, in many ways, as a technologist, you're solving a problem, and in many ways, while serving whatever form of service it is, that's exactly what you're doing. So we're really looking at applying innovative technologies to solving problems.
Right, but does it? I mean, you've served in some pretty sort of dangerous parts of the world, and presumably, I mean, I'm not going to ask on the danger that you might have to kill me if I gave you that. But I mean, on the grounds of, you know, our relationship with danger as a society. Is that something you've brought, a perspective on that, in terms of the business that you're building and the view of life that presumably you have after having had the sort of very active military career that you've had in the past?
I think the perspective that I bring, and indeed the perspective that many former service people bring, is one of reality. Things that are good on paper but don't actually help us in our everyday lives are not really that much use to many businesses. And again, very similar to my previous military career, things that actually you get taught or you might think are important, when you actually are faced with the challenges and the reality of conflict, that sometimes changes that perspective and all of a sudden you gravitate.
So, what's that say? All plans are only as good as their first contact with the enemy?
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, planning is about planning. It's important to do, but not to fall apart if it doesn't happen. And business is very much the same.
I mean, it sounds like you bring a very practical approach to cybersecurity. I mean, is that part of the military legacy, actually, to make it real rather than lofty and strategic?
I think it of course is absolutely strategic in terms of its aims, and there is a very, very tactical, day-to-day practical element. Like I said, things that aren't relevant or things that don't help people achieve what they need to do. Cybersecurity is about enabling activity. It's about enabling us to use technology to solve major problems. It's about making us better at our work, and actually security being part of the DNA of the business. And so actually cybersecurity professionals regardless of whether they've got military backgrounds or otherwise, would acknowledge that. I think the military background certainly helps.
Right. I mean, I also wonder, I mean, you know, you left the military with a strong sense of service. In fact, you were awarded an MBE for that service. I mean, do you bring that sense of service into this new world, this digital world? And if so, how does that play out for you? I mean, does it give you the same sense of pride?
It gives me a huge sense of pride, and that's, of course, a very personal thing, but it's something that I absolutely want to live out in my day-to-day life right now. So, yes, I see what I'm doing now as service. Actually, it's service to society, it's service to industry. It's also helping individuals as well as businesses look after things that are important to them, and for me that I take a lot of satisfaction.
And how ambitious are you with this business? I mean, how big could you take it?
Yeah, hugely ambitious, because, and again, like many of the companies here in London and many tech companies around the globe, the fact of the matter is we are solving a problem, and that problem is helping hundreds of businesses. And the reality is we will be limited probably by our own imagination and our own efforts.
If you could go and start CybSafe again right now, knowing what you know now, would you still do it in London?
Absolutely. I would do it in London, and I do it in London.
Why? What's the sell for you?
London is an amazing hotbed of great talent, opportunity, optimism. It's also a place of great reality. We know what it takes as a group of people, and again, that group of people, yes, they're Londoners, but they're not all originally from London. There are lots of people from all around the UK who have come to settle here, and you can't actually replicate that very easily elsewhere. There are great cities all around the world, some great companies, but actually in London we've got all of the ingredients.
And I just have a very quick last question. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand and help your business in some way, what's the number one thing you need right now on that path to kind of world beater that you've laid out for us? What would be the way that you would get that business to the next level? What could we do?
So actually the thing that we're always looking for, of course, is access to customers who understand, or that we understand their problem, and making sure that they can see that we can solve that. And so we do as much of that as possible. So the reality is being placed in front of organisations who are sitting there scratching their head and saying, how do I reduce this human cyber risk? For us, that's exactly what we would want to be doing. We would want to present them an opportunity for them to see how they could do that easily. So anything that does that is good for us.
Okay, visibility. That sounds like a good place to end it. You've had 30 minutes of visibility here on the Capital Conversation. Oz, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for this week. Thank you to my guest, Oz Alashe. Fast tech, fast crimes, and a fast-changing world. It's been a tale of our city. So move over, Charles Dickens. There's a new story in town. Crime fighters fighting villains you can't see, but with the potential to affect every single one of us. And if all else fails, well, you might be left thinking, who is watching you? Relax. You can always spend more time watching the Capital Conversation. I'll see you next time.